All right, this is my take on a little bit solar, a little bit fascism, a little bit, which is synonymous with capitalism. I hate to break it to all y'all. Um, a little bit nutrition and water. Okay, so here we go. California, born and raised in California. My family's been in California. We don't know exactly when my grandfather's dad first came here. He came here from Mexico sometime at the beginning of the 20th century. You could, I assume, just in my own way of calculating, I was never told, somewhere between the 19 teens and the very early 20s. My grandfather was born in East LA in 1924, and my grandmother was born in El Paso, Texas, and didn't move here until she was, I believe, 8ish, around 8 years old. And my family's been in the greater Los Angeles area for the most part. Their first generation, the second generation, well, the first generation born here, they all dispersed for the most part. Well, not all of them. One of them stuck around, two of them stuck around, two of them left. That's my grandparents' children. My father's side of the family, I don't know exactly when they came to the valley, but my dad was born and raised in the valley. My dad's the Irish side, my mom is the Mexican side. All right, so let me get into California. A couple of things. Primarily, this is relating to solar. You know, what's around you is what becomes fixation. That's an important element of human contemplation and awareness. So as such, some of the things that I've learned about solar since I'm basically just getting into telemarketing regarding setting up solar appointments. As California, okay, important thing to note, there is a identity portrayed of certain places. This is where they get the red state and the blue state, and that's implied this party. I do want to emphasize, I've said this multiple times, and I don't expect anybody to backtrack and see it, but according to the 1939 Webster's Dictionary, the definition of the word face, which is well into 2.5 columns worth of definitions to show the diversity of the word, way towards the back. I'm not saying it's the most significant definition or it is the real meaning. Just one of the attributes of the word face inside the Webster Dictionary is to cause one to face left or right, and that is synonymous. It is separate. It's not. There's not the next one. The part, a continuation with a semicolon, is to deceive. This makes me think of the African legend that I learned from Joseph Campbell. There's the devil that walks through, and they use these colors too. I think it's very significant that this ancient African legend utilizes the colors in this manner. But this guy, a bad guy, puts on a hat, and it's halfway. Half of it is blue with a red feather, and the other half is red with a blue feather. And he walks down the street, and he turns the hat. When he gets to the end of the street, he turns the hat around and he walks back twice. And the effect of this is that the neighbors cross the street and they say, "Hey, did you see that guy with the blue hat and the red feather?" It's like, "No, no, no, you mean the guy with the red hat and the blue feather." And he creates contention. So this is essentially, you understand, this is all has to do with drawing off of, just to summarize, Bruce Lee, taken from Bruce Lee's philosophy on fighting. Bruce Lee cites that if you want to remain in control, you have to be able to create tension. Tension creates control, and this is it's a psychological dynamic of humanity. And this party line is part of that, part of the means of doing that, which is very simple. You understand, there's roots down in the mother-child relationship, so that you have, like I've called these people that are believe that solar is based on a, this is interesting. The people, you can tell a Republican when you call, because they believe that solar is a party line issue, and as Republicans, it's their civic duty, if not their religious responsibility, because of the extent in which they've demonized their opponents. And to demonize your opponent is just a means of projecting and take the speck out of your take the log out of your eye before the speck out of your brother's. To demonize your opponent is just a means of rationalizing an inner urge or behavior that you recognize consciously, but you are trying to subdue and bury it in the subconscious. And the way that you do this is by exerting the energies that otherwise would be inward, outward. And primarily, not 100%, but primarily that comes out in violence. So, elderly people in particular, and there are some younger people, and there are black people too. And I'm sorry, any black person that identifies with the Democrats is bad enough, but with a Republican, you're, wow, you're a sick, sick, sick individual. But I understand why too. But I mean, that doesn't take away from the fact that you're sick. So, anyways, these people that say stuff like, "I don't believe in it," "Oh, it's a ripoff." I've heard people say, "I don't." Well, a lady said, "I don't believe in the government taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. You know, hardworking Americans like us, we have to pay that." And I was like, "Well, if it's that's the case, then it's your money. Take it back." And it's interesting to see them. It's not a sales pitch. I'm not. I'm an ideological wizard. I'm trying to bash people's psychological mind fuck. I mean, I would rather be able to hit a jab in there and let them hang up on me and not have to worry about a sale than just try to appeal to them on a sale basis. Because it's a psychological cancer. So the California has this identity that we're a blue state. Yet when I'm calling these homes, the phenomenal part is the resistance, the outright vehement resistance to these programs. And here's the crazy thing is, most black people in California identify with the Democratic Party. You know, is that smart? It's kind of like a desperate measure. If you have a mom and a dad, your dad rapes you and your mom beats you, the probability is that you're going to side with the mom for the sake of just getting beat, because no one wants to be raped. So, as brutal as it is, that's the reality of the situation that they're in. And that's seen by the California prison population, which under a Democratic governorship has been vehemently defended against and fought to preserve, despite the fact that the United States federal government, an entity that is a gross violator of human rights all around the planet and inside of its own borders, i.e. Indian reservations, just for the starting point, has actually sued California, the government, designating that the prison situation in California, the only state in the entire 50 United States to be designated by the United States government a human rights violation. That's some pretty amazing language for the United States federal government to use in any context other than somebody that they want to go bomb and kill. But potentially, California is viewed like that. See, that the element of the federal government isn't that the United States is in control, it's that particular segments of the United States are in control. Like when the George Bush legacy with Texas basically dominating, or if you take Texas and Arkansas in the same region, you basically have the pseudo-Confederate alliance of Dixie Republican Democrats that harnessed the power of the entire government from 1982 all the way, or 1980 all the way up until, well, you can say Obama's different because he's from Chicago, but I don't do party lines. I do policy implementation and actual practices. So, anyways, but from just the most naive, infantile, childish, and that's not an insult. That's, when you're under massive amounts of stress, your brain regresses. When you are a repressed people, if you can't recognize the psychological effect of repression, you will never be able to address the source of the repression. And like examples seen in Black Wall Street, if anybody looks at Black Wall Street, you'll see that just by the mere fact of being able to assimilate and to contribute or participate in the greater society, that doesn't alleviate the underlying source of repression. It actually instigates it and inflames it and incites it into levels that become explosive. What they call the St. Louis race riots, which was, white people need to call it a race riot because it was a massacre, and they can't self-identify themselves as these brutal, just like they can't identify Jim Crow as fascism. Wow, that is taboo. Don't do it. That is nothing alike. There's nothing similar to fascism. And it's a terrifying thing, and they are willing to hurt people that assert that on a public scale. It's like Martin Luther King when he was civil rights. When he was civil rights, he was pro-America. Basically, we want inclusion in the American system. And April 4th, 1967, his pre-assassination anniversary, when he went anti-war, and he started to realize what exactly the American system was, he started to become anti-fascist. And he lost the majority of black support, along with the majority of white support. Surveys taken at the end of his life show that 75% of white people opposed him and 55% of black people opposed him. Primarily, the black people were primarily at that point. It was a split between, yes, there was the Muslim movement wasn't as adamant anymore, but it still was existed. But the NAACP was a primary ideological force within the black community that was opposing Martin Luther King's anti-fascist transition, which didn't last very long. You can do a lot of things. You could be pro-gay, you could be anti-war, you could be women's rights, you could be children's rights, you could be stop the drug war. But if you turn anti-fascist like Wilhelm Reich, it's a whole nother level of opposition that you're going to face. I would actually go to say that Kennedy started to develop, JFK and the Kennedy family, that for a second the Kennedy family started to self-identify as anti-fascist. And that was probably the root of the brute force that was levied against them as a whole. It's not just race, and it's not just politics, and it's not just poverty, and it's not just the military-industrial complex, and it's not just the electoral system, and it's not just voters' rights, and it's not just jobs, and it's not just the environment. These are all just branches, twigs on a branch. And when you see the trunk, you get a clear perception, but no one has been able, even Huey P. Long with the wonderful speech, Every Man a King, wasn't able to identify fully the root system. It's very traumatic to face oneself, which in a sense is who you identify with. And back to this California. So California self-identifies as a democratic state. Here's an interesting thing. Black people in California primarily identify as Democrat. I didn't grow up, I'm sorry, that's a big overstatement. I lived for a short period of time, just 1 year, in Leimert Park, which is a South LA prominent black area. Not only were they hardcore, big time, go Jerry Brown, there was a Jerry Brown headquarters dead center in the heart of Leimert Park, but they were also ardently supportive of Barack Obama. You want to call it, and the simple truth is, it's on a race line. But again, this has to do with the psychological effects of repression, the ability to, the need to self-identify is simplified down to visual stimulation, because beyond the visual stimulation is trauma. That's some very deep trauma. It's important to note, I think it's important to note that the common designation or use of the term boy in racist vernacular, particularly in in all American vernacular concerning slavery, it's important. I really think it's important to note that boy is a legal designation. It's not just a psychological insult. It's deeper than that. It's as much as a reinforcement for the perpetrator of that designation as it is to the target of it. But it is a legal designation. So, as a democratic state, um, with not with a menial black community, let's keep it real here, and even on that level, homeowners, a menial uh, population of black homeowners, um, I like to point out that there is no black community awareness of or drive to, in the very minimum, support Obama's solar agenda, if you want to call it that, as it is referred to by the opposition side. I identify that likewise with the psychology of repression. And this is brutal. There's an 18-year-old boy. I mean, it wasn't in California, but it happens all the time. And it echoes throughout the country in the right circles. White people, they easily close their eyes to it. And even if they hear it, their simplification is act right. It wouldn't happen if they act right. And that's a regurgitated phrase that's echoed likewise as far more often than the actual acts of violence. But there's an 18-year-old boy somewhere back east that was unarmed and shot down by the police. And there doesn't look to be any justice coming his way any more than it was for on a national scale with Trayvon Martin or Jordan Davis, or the unnational scale of Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. or Oscar Grant or Dante Stories. You go on and on and on. So, as that, no, it appears that the black community in California is, in one sense, trying to identify as a democratic unit or a unit of the Democratic Party while not being able to free itself from trying to replicate the opponent or enemy, which is the GOP, which is adamantly opposed to all of this democratic propaganda and whatnot. So, like one guy, I had called him and I was like, he was in Riverside, and I was like, you live in, would you say you spend more than $80 a month on your electric bill with SoCal Edison? He's like, I probably spent 150, and I'm proud to. Like, you do realize that SoCal Edison is one of the biggest IOUs in the United States. That's independently owned utility or investor-owned utility. And he said, yeah, and that's capitalism. And I was like, well, that's great. If you love capitalism, then you love me, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to support local businesses, local contractors, and this is the salesman is where the salesman goes, so goes America, and that flipped him out. He's like, because you understand, whatever they say they're going for, it's actually that's what they have to do to reinforce the contradiction in their behavior. These massive companies are reminiscent of a state-protected communist-style enterprise in which there is no independent free market or choice. You can even equate these power grid areas to electrical plantations when you take into account that it's living energy. A person 10 years ago, in the span of 10 years going back, a person that's lived in the same house and let's say today is spending $80 a month on their bill, they've spent if I'm not mistaken, they spent $10,000 to $15,000 on their bill, on just their electrical. And over 10 years, that's like might even be more than that. That's a living energy that it takes to produce that. That's a workforce that is working solely to provide income to a group of individuals, plantation owners, grid owners, utility owners, that do not work. And every year, these rate increases, and in the event of a catastrophe, for repair, these rate increases are even go up even more, only to be followed with additional rate increases that primarily just, if not primarily is an understatement, go to managerial, bureaucratic, investor returns. So the resistance in the black community in California to solar is somewhat mind-boggling, but not unexplainable. On the levels, like in just take LA, in South LA, in the Leimert Park area, taking into the economic, okay, where the black unemployment in this country is beyond that than it was in the Great Depression. It's pushing 40 to 50%. In the Great Depression, it was pretty much equal with white people. That's crazy. Things got better. So, and white unemployment right now is about 20%. So, in just take Leimert Park, which is primarily black owned, the economic effects, compound effects, just like compound interest, on the process of solarizing from apartments to houses go like this. One, the homeowner, you already, Republicans are saying one thing, that, oh, this is just the welfare president trying to give money to the poor people. And that seems to have an effect to dissuade black people from wanting to be designated as poor by accepting these programs. This is very remedial, childish bullying. While black people could say that, interpret that to mean this group, this segment of California population have designated that they don't want any of it. They're not going to fight for it. They're not going to argue for it. They're not going to make any effort for it. They claim to be the source of it, and they claim that it's wrong for it to be distributed in any means, even though they have the same access. But they have adamantly stated on some kind of ideological basis that they have adopted from some external psychological source, which they think is their own intellect. They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. This money is sitting there. If just say Leimert Park were to go solar, think of this, black people. How many black families have been forced to shut their energy off and live in a state of terrifying fear that there was going to be compound effects, or had youth that were driven to crime because of the shame element, because I don't want to be like my mom and dad because of this, totally centered on the brutality of the DWP, LA DWP. If there can be a designation of, hey, this is a potential weapon of warfare, for South LA, a predominantly black community, to solarize, black jobs will be created. There will be the tendency of small black companies to try to mimic the white model and basically monopolize the entire infrastructure of the industry, of the market, the solar market. That'll have to be something that can be, I mean, I'm not a fan of the black church, I'm going to keep it real with you guys, but that could be something that can be addressed on that level. The church has been proven to be a resource of organization, of communicating valuable information. Even on if you want to get into nepotism and cronyism, that's fine. It's like this, to say that we're above that is to say you're not included in it. It's not noble. It's ignoble. So, solarizing. One, the state of California literally, desperately needs to do this, because 40% of our entire water consumption just goes into energy production. This is a hardcore traumatic fact. The community that goes the most solar is going to literally, if they play it right, They can befriend the farmers. We're doing this for the farmers to provide our food because we understand as family people that the farmer's family is critical, is our family. This is some very powerful psychological mind busting stuff. You got charter schools over there. Black people are very big on charter schools because of you tend to get better tests. It's all about tests. You tend to get better educational test effects in charter schools than you do in public schools, which makes a lot of sense. I get that. That's the failure of the public schools. I'm not a fan of charter schools for a variety of reasons, but okay, I get the gist of it. Charter schools can go solar too. Charter schools can go solar not just for the economic benefit, but to use it as an educational resource to start to train their kids because the world is going solar. There is not an if and or but. Germany's 65% solar. They've proven already in their entire grid, since they shut down and decommissioned their nuclear power plants, that not only is it feasible under questionable and mediocre conditions, well, I don't get 100%. You're talking this language of, well, if the unit is capable of getting 25,000 watts and you're only getting 15,000 watts, that's a loss of, no, that's not a loss of anything. If the unit's capable of getting 2,000 watts and you're getting 500 watts as opposed to drawing from the grid and having to pay the DWP, then you're getting 500 watts of power. It's not a loss. This is a very menial, futile mentality of self-defeat. It's not this half glass open or half glass empty, full. It's just self-defeat. This is the psychological effect of repression. Imagine black families being able to not only alleviate the DWP electric bill, which is one of the most expensive in the state and the country, but likewise being able to get money out of that system as well. The community-wide effects, the job-creating effects, the experiential effects, the educational effects, the psychological, having a black president, in imagery-wise, I agreed with this. I was very pro-Obama. I was anti-war, very pro-Obama, because I thought that the psychological effects were going to... That is not as powerful as seen and active. And you understand, Black Wall Street is not over. It's a real thing. With success in the black community comes great aggression. It's a very real thing. But that has been used as a means to prevent the engagement of success on a grander scale and a reduction down to very limited things. It's time to break some molds and declare war. You got to see it as war. I'm sorry, that's my summary on California, and I'm out of time. I'd like to go on more, and I probably will. This is the joy of YouTube.